Caroline. I am the chair of the Staff Disability Wellbeing Network and warmly welcome you here today. Just for information before I pass you on to my speaker, we are recording the session today because James would like to use it as a podcast for himself. So what we decided to do, if it works for everyone, is that if you would like to ask questions while the recording is on, that's fine. If you want much more comfortable doing that when we've turned it off, I'll turn it off and then give you a chance to ask questions. So either way, both have a chance to do that. So just let me know which way it works for you, okay? I will hand over to James at this point.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I've been talking about mental health and blogging for quite a long time, but I haven't done anything like this. So I've written about it and spoken with friends and family, which is a good first step. And now this is a whole new experience, so thanks for having me. I want it to be a discussion, so it's not like a lecture or anything, so feel free at any point just to jump in, ask questions, or if you prefer, I'll be sticking around at the end if you want to have a chat. I'll move over here so I can change the slides. So the reason I'm here, you probably saw this sort of stat yesterday because it was World Mental Health Day, but a quarter of us suffer from a mental illness every year. It's quite a well-known stat. I actually think it could be higher, just based on the amount of people I've spoken to, like friends and family who have had problems. But in terms of universities, like this one, so I found a good stat from this month, actually, from the Mental Health Foundation. So a decade ago, there was 3,000 students saying that they had a problem, and 10 years it's doubled 5 times to 15,000, which at first glance it could be, you could think that's quite negative, but it's also maybe because people feel like they can talk about it more, so they're coming out and being more open. So I kind of think it's a bit of both. There are more problems, but at the same time more people are coming out and speaking and sharing, which is also good. So my background, so I've suffered from anxiety and psychosis. So I'll tell you about anxiety first. So when I was a kid, I was a very, very big worrier, like overthinker. I'd have this ridiculous routine with school where I would go to school and I'd think about like all the lessons I had and all the people I'd see and what they might say, what might happen. So I was effectively giving myself things to worry about before they'd even happened. And then during the day, if someone said something, I wouldn't get over it. I'd kind of think about it too much and it'd affect me for the next day. So that was when I was quite young. I got some more confidence as a teenager, but then I developed a bit of social anxiety. So I kind of didn't feel very comfortable about going out with friends and like being in a group, like a large group at a pub or something. I thought I found a solution for this at one point, which was alcohol, which I'll speak about more later. But that wasn't the solution, obviously. Ended up kind of embarrassing myself on several occasions, which kind of was good timing because it was time to go to university after that. So after my A-levels, I went to University of Portsmouth to do business studies, and I was there for 3 years. And then I came here after that to do a master's at University of Hertfordshire in marketing because that was my favourite subject from business. Uni was actually quite a good time for me mentally. Like I didn't really have any major problems apart from the mild social anxiety, which I mentioned before. But to be honest, I was aware that universities had like wellbeing services, but I didn't take advantage of them at the time, which is a bit of a regret because I think if I had, I might not have encountered the problems in my mid-20s, which I'm going to tell you about. So in 2016, I had a psychotic episode as a result of breaking up with my long-term girlfriend. But I was also putting myself under a lot of stress from work, comparing myself to others, like being really hard on myself. So the anxiety kind of built up, and I broke up with my girlfriend and I had to move back in with my family, which was good because they were able to look after me. But my behaviour got worse and worse, more bizarre and worrying thoughts, and they eventually had to call an ambulance, and I was taken to Watford General Hospital, and they diagnosed me with, it was an acute psychotic episode with symptoms of schizophrenia. So as a result, I was sectioned under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, and I was sent to a psychiatric facility in Hertfordshire where I had to spend nearly 4 weeks. So I had to take medication. It's my next slide. I took clonazepam, olanzapine, sodium valproate while I was in hospital, and also when I came out, I had to keep taking these. There was benefits of them, but also side effects. So the good thing about medication, in my experience anyway, it was effectively like slowing my brain down, because it was thinking so much and there was so many bad thoughts. It was effectively like pressing the reset button. So it made me very sleepy, very lethargic. I basically had to rebuild my broken mind after coming out of the psychiatric wards and being back at home. So there's benefits and side effects of all medication, but I did eventually come off the medication this year. So I think it's important, whatever experience you have with medication, you've got to communicate with your doctor, and if you want to come off, you've got to say, I'm really struggling with the side effects, I need to come off, and try and work with them different ways you can handle the situation. As I said, it doesn't work for everyone, so some people find that counselling is a lot better. So I have heard a very popular feedback from friends and family that one example is cognitive behavioural therapy, so CBT, works for a lot of people. I myself didn't have this type of therapy. I kind of had a more one-to-one with my care coordinator every week, which it was good that I was talking about my mental health at the time, but it wasn't like constructive in terms of like, it felt like I was basically moaning at her every week, telling her how miserable I was. Whereas I also went to a group kind of session by mental health charity Minds. So there's one in Watford near where I live, and they do all sorts of sessions. And I went to one called Manage Anxiety, which was really good because I was sitting around in a circle, a group of people who were saying about how they felt, and it was similar to how the thoughts I had and the experiences I had. So I'd say, like with medication and counselling, like different things work for different people. For example, since sharing my story, I've spoken to a lot of friends about their own mental health. One friend, he takes tablets for his anxiety because it balances the chemicals in his brain and he's able to function better with them. But another friend said that he can't take medication, and he finds counselling very helpful for his anxiety. So it's interesting talking to different people and what works for them. My next subject is mental health in the workplace. So as I mentioned, one of the causes of my breakdown was stress from work as well as relationship. So I used to work in a very corporate role for a big company in the market research industry. I kind of fell into it after uni, and it was the first job I got offered, and I was so fed up with interviews that I went with it, and I ended up working 4 years in an industry where I felt like I didn't belong, and I wasn't really passionate about. So that kind of had a real negative effect on me leading up to the psychosis. But also now I work for a charity, and I'm finding them a lot better. So after coming out of hospital, I had some time off work. I think it was a few weeks, quite a long time. I was quite desperate to get back into work and like start my life again. But then when I got back into work, I didn't enjoy it, and I said, like, I want to do something else. I was kind of driving mum and dad crazy because I wanted to do one thing, and then when I got into that situation, I wanted to do the next thing. So I worked part-time, like 2 or 3 days a week, and that was all I could manage. And some days I had to say to my line manager, like, I need to go home, like, I feel horrible, I have no energy, like the side effects of the medication. So I had to go home a few times to get away from a job I don't like, which is like, it was a blessing in disguise, as I say. And then going back to now, I work for a charity, so the work we do is very rewarding, makes you feel really good. And when I actually applied for the job after my interview, my line manager straight away said, I noticed on your application form you said you suffer from mental illness. So let me know if you ever need to talk about anything like confidentially. So straight away, like first impressions for support was really good. And I'm going to talk a bit more about who I work for later. Sleep. I don't know if you expected me to talk about sleep today, but before I had my psychotic episodes, I was a bit of an insomniac. So some nights I'd only get 2 or 3 hours. Some nights I'd stay up the whole night just in bed with all my crazy thoughts, not knowing what to do with myself. So I think I took for granted about learning the importance of sleep for mental health. And I've discovered a lot of tips this year actually, which are good for sleep. But before I go into them, do you have any problems sleeping, or do you have any tips that, yeah?
Like, in general, I struggle because like I think, like you're saying, like my day is quite hectic.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you don't really get a chance to like switch off. So I'm having the process of like switching off while I'm trying to be in bed, and then I listen to music. I listen to the wrong music, so it keeps me up awake.
So you listen to music, then go to bed, yeah.
It keeps me up awake. So I think what I found helps actually is just, well, enough just breathing, just trying to slow my mind down. And for me, that just helps.
Yeah. I've got another bit actually about meditation and mindfulness, which is a good kind of thing to do before bed, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of them was actually on sleep, and some of the advice was about like to kind of turn off technology like an hour or an hour and a half before you plan to go to bed, and almost have like a bedtime ritual. So I've started putting my phone downstairs in the kitchen, and then going somewhere else in the house, reading a book, and an hour later going to bed, still not taking my phone up to bed and putting it by my bedside, leaving it downstairs. And I've got like analog alarms and a radio to rely on to wake me up in the morning, so I'm not relying on my phone for an alarm. But also caffeine, which I'll talk about later. I've got a section about healthy eating, but basically not taking caffeine in the afternoon has its benefits. So next, I want to talk about social media. So before my episodes, I was really bad at comparing myself to others, like constantly. So I'd go on LinkedIn and see someone from my course had got promoted or something and be like, why aren't I getting that in my job? Or I'd go on Instagram and see someone with an engagement ring and look at my situation and think, like, I'm in my mid-20s, should I be thinking about that? Or someone's bought a house or a flat on Facebook and they're, you know, changing their status, all those sort of things. So it can be quite a toxic way of thinking. But it's a highlight reel, so people only post their best bits, and you don't know what's going on behind their stories or their posts or whatever they're doing. But also, social media for mental health is like a double-edged sword, because since sharing my story online, I've had like loads of amazing feedback from both friends and family, but also people I don't know have just reached out to me saying, like, oh, I read your article on Mind, and I've been like getting in touch with them, following their blogs, and it's been great. So social media it can be a bad thing, but it can be a really powerful thing as well. So next section is quite a big one. It's my personal sport, exercise and hobbies which work for me. So this is different for everyone. So before I start, I want to say, like, because it works for me, it might not necessarily work for you, but I've tried a lot of different things since becoming better, coming out of hospital and things like that. So the first one is cycling to work. Believe it or not, I live in Watford and I cycle to where I work in Hatfield, which is quite a long way, so it's 13.5 miles. The first time I did it, I thought, what am I doing? It took a long time, but it was a really epic adventure, and when I got to work, I felt so good. And since doing that, I've managed to get the journey down to kind of what it says on there actually, about an hour and 7 minutes, so I'm kind of matching Google at the moment, which is good. But it's amazing like how you have your best thinking while you're outdoors on a bike, instead of being in a car in a traffic jam, being really stressed. I arrive to work really happy and full of like enthusiasm and good ideas. So I try and cycle to work as much as possible. I've also tried five-a-side football recently, which is a good like group exercise where you have a lot of laughs with friends. I joined a tennis club at the start of the summer. I haven't been in a while since it's gone a bit dark and cold, but I'm going to try and go and play tennis a bit more because that's another fun group activity which it's an exercise and it doesn't feel like a chore, like you're enjoying it more than sort of punishing yourself. Next, as we've talked about before, running. So I used to hate running, so where I live, like, it's just streets, and I associate running with just running on a pavement, like, with traffic everywhere, on my own. And then I discovered parkrun, and there's loads of parkruns in Hertfordshire and all over the UK where you're basically in nature in a park with hundreds of people, and it's an amazing community, like, full of good vibes. And it completely transformed, like, my relationship with running. And now I've signed up to do the Great South Run, which is in a couple of weeks in Portsmouth. So. And I'm raising money for mine doing that as well. So it feels good to run, but also raise money for a good cause while you're doing it. Next is, I've got to mention some other classes I've done, which are like more group type exercise. So I was talking with one of my old lecturers before this session actually about group exercise, and we both do things like circuit training where it's like a boot camp, and you show up every week and you see the same people and you have a lot of fun and you motivate each other. I've also tried a bounce class, trampoline-based cardio. I don't know if you've heard of that, where you're on a trampoline, like making an idiot out of yourself, but feeling really good about it. And I did a kickboxing session with my brother, and that was a good way to spend time with him because he doesn't really exercise at all. So we went to, it was actually held in my old school in St Albans, so we went and got absolutely like destroyed, like doing kickboxing. I was so tired, but it felt so good. The gym as well. I was talking to my lecturer about how we both hate the gym because we associate it with just being on a treadmill, being really stationary on your own. I was part of a gym last year, and I signed up part of it for like 1 or 2 months, and I had to cancel. I've gone to one again recently where you do like a day pass because I'm thinking about doing more like strength and weight training. I think gym's okay now, but before that I didn't enjoy the gym because I was just on the treadmill and it was boring. But I think they can be good as well. Like as I said before, different things for different people. Next thing is, I mentioned the charity I work for. I've actually got a video because one of the hobbies which I've discovered is good for mental health is gardening. So hopefully this will work when I click it. It gives me a chance to have a drink and some cake while you watch. So yeah, ground worker who I work for. I've bought some like handouts from printouts actually because that project was done a few months ago at College Lane campus, but we've also got plans to... what's that?
I think that's the next video playing.
Oh.
You should just
God.
Just bring in dramatic music to go with it.
Made me jump. Yeah, so we did that at College Lane campus at the start of this year. And I was talking to the project officer who runs it today, and we're waiting for the green light to do it again in DHAV campus. And he said it's going to be happening outside M block, like between the car park and that building. They want to build a growing and relaxing area, so with seating and plants and trees and shrubs for people to enjoy. So that's just one of the many things that they do. Groundwork East, they're a really good charity. I'm really proud to work for them. So that's almost the last hobby. I've got cooking down here because, believe it or not, I think cooking's another good kind of thing good thing for your mind. Like you can do it with other people, and I'll talk about healthy eating in a minute. But I started enjoying it when I went to uni, like living with other people, and it's hard, like in the adult stressful life, to carry on doing it. Like you can end up buying ready meals or something, but it's good to kind of put time towards that. It's funny, the first time I blogged about how gardening and cooking were good for my mental health, I got feedback from like mum saying, oh, I've got plenty of that you can do. So reading is a really important thing I want to talk about. So the first book I read about mental health earlier this year was by Frank Bruno, who he is a former British heavyweight world champion boxer, but he's also got bipolar disorder. He's been sectioned not once, not twice, but 3 times since he retired from boxing. And reading that was amazing for me because he talks about being in a psychiatric ward, like he puts into words very well, so I was really able to relate. And that also inspired me to start sort of writing and share my story online. And the other 2 books I read quite recently on holiday, so they're quite similar. So Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig is, he suffered from really serious depression and nearly jumped off a cliff in Ibiza. He was like really close to ending his life. He was at a really low point, but now he's he's recovered and he's found ways to manage his anxiety, and he's all over social media. He's a really great guy. Like, he's a good example for men everywhere about sharing your feelings and that it's all okay and things like that. And similarly, Mad Girl by Bryony Gordon is really good because she's a columnist for the Telegraph, so she's a really good writer, but similarly to the Matt Hay book, she writes about mental health very well, but she also uses humour very well. She talks about her depression. She's got obsessive compulsive disorder. She used to be bulimic. She's had all kinds of problems, and she writes about them really well, and the way she uses humour kind of humanises it and normalises it. So yeah, I'd highly recommend those books. They're a good first step. If you're not comfortable with talking about mental health, it's good to kind of discover something on your own, which is what I did. I kind of on my own read this and discovered that so many people have these issues, and that it inspired me to be braver and share. So I think that's one of the amazing powers of books. So last thing on my list is actually the cinema. So I signed up to an unlimited membership recently, so I can see as many films as I want for the same price at the cinema per month. And I've actually discovered that cinema is like one of my happy places. I basically go there sometimes on my own. I'll just turn off my phone for 2 hours and forget about life and just immerse myself in a film and then really enjoy a film and then come out of it feeling really good. So yeah, I think cinema's great. So that's the end of the kind of hobbies section. Has anyone else got anything that I haven't spoken about?
Listening to music, I find of myself just literally, it's the strangest thing, but you know when you're traveling on a train or whatever,
Yeah.
or like when you're busy, just like stopping for me, listening to music, I find that actually I'm able to switch off.
Yeah, definitely.
No matter where you are, just on your lunch break, just sitting and listening to music for me because
Yeah, and when I go running as well, like the music makes such a big difference. Last weekend I did the 10K and I was listening to the soundtrack of, there's a film at the moment called A Star Is Born. So I was listening to like Lady Gaga and running along and like feeling really good. So it's amazing how music can help you in so many ways. Anyone else? Yeah, walking a dog, yeah.
When he gets to, he's a boxer, called Bruno, and he kind of is a bit overexcited sometimes, and it gets a bit stressy, but most of the time it's just good because you have to get out, you can't have that excuse.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and we talk to all sorts of people on our walk. So it's a good way of talking, if you're not, if someone who is kind of alone and doesn't talk to many people, it's a good way of
Yeah, definitely. I used to have a Cocker Spaniel, and he died last year, unfortunately, but he was like 15, so he had a really good life. But I have some really happy memories, like as a child and teenager, just taking him to the local park, and yeah, it's brilliant, like meeting other people, meeting their dogs, and being really embarrassed when your dog's like humping another one. And important for your mind. So back when I was coming out of the psychiatric wards, I had more of an appetite. Like, it was one of the side effects from medication, so I put on quite a lot of weight in 2017. But also since I've been getting better, I haven't gone on any diets, so I don't really believe in going on a diet, but I've kind of been more sensible and more mindful about what I eat. So I've picked up all sorts. So there was a program on iPlayer recently called The Truth About Carbs, and me and the people I work with are quite into like sort of busting all these myths, and we learned from this program that like food like white rice and pasta and white bread is so high in carbs, it's got the equivalent sugar to a double chocolate muffin. If you're not someone who if you eat it once a week, it's fine, but if you eat it like quite regularly, like I was, I loved my pasta last year, and then not exercising, you're actually not burning that sugar, and it's can be quite bad for you. So I've discovered all kinds of like more fibre rich foods, more fruits and veg, more protein, things like that, like less saturated fats, but also plant-based eating I've discovered after listening to another podcast, funny enough. So like I like putting almond milk in my porridge, for example, instead of normal milk. I'm not going to turn vegan because I love my milk and my meat and my fish, but it's just these things you pick up from eating healthier, and food really does affect your mood. I lost nearly 2 stone since May, June time, like this year, so about 4 or 5 months is that. and it's made me feel so much better. Like my confidence is so much higher, my self-esteem, and it's been great. Healthy eating, like really, it makes you feel good, both body and mind. I learned about, I think I mentioned earlier, caffeine. So one of the guys I spoke to, as a result of sharing my blog, he was telling me about his anxiety, and one of the conclusions he came to with his counsellor was that the caffeine actually negatively affected his anxiety. So with some people, that's kind of something to be wary of. And as well, like if you're taking like coffee and Red Bull like in the afternoon and evening, it can affect your sleep. And another thing I learned from a podcast was, even if it doesn't affect you, like if you can have a cup of tea before bed and you're fine, caffeine can affect while you're sleeping, like the quality of sleep you get. So there's 3 types. There's like light, deep and REM, which stands for rapid eye movement. I sound like an expert, but I'm just repeating what I heard. I don't know what I'm talking about, but apparently the rapid eye movement one is the essential one, because that's when your mind and body repair themselves while you're sleeping. So if you take caffeine kind of in the afternoon and evening, that can, with some people, and maybe not everyone, but that can affect you. And lastly, alcohol. I mentioned alcohol earlier, but it was funny reading those 3 books that I showed you. Something that was quite consistent in all their stories was that when they were at their lowest points, like suffering, they were quite heavy drinkers, and now that they're getting better, they're kind of more in moderation type drinkers, which is same as me. Like, don't get me wrong, like at uni I used to binge drink, pre-drink quite a lot, like a lot of students, but now I can only like handle about 3 drinks in a night and then I'm done and then I have to start drinking water. But I've learned to enjoy nights out more sober, and then the next day, like, it's interesting when you're on a WhatsApp group and everyone's like, oh, I feel like crap, and then you feel, oh, I feel quite good. And you can also do more in your day the next day. Like, I hate it when I have a day like full of stuff planned and it's just all ruined because I'm hungover. So yeah, I could go on about alcohol for ages, but that's all I'm going to say. So we mentioned mindfulness earlier, I think. I wanted to talk about one of the apps I've discovered called Headspace. It's basically something which helps you meditate and be mindful. So it's like 5-minute sessions once a day. There's a bloke with an amazing voice who talks you through your breathing and how you should sit and think about like how your body's feeling. It's a really good app. So and you can fit it into your day quite well because it's just 5 minutes. So in the morning or before you go to bed. That's really helped me a lot. They do separate like versions of the app as well for people who suffer with sleep or suffer with anxiety, so I'd highly recommend it. But also yoga. While I was on holiday, I wasn't like this on holiday, like on the beach with my legs crossed. I did some rooftop yoga sessions which were really cool, and I really enjoyed them. It was interesting because I used to do yoga a few years ago, but I didn't like think about what I was doing in the session. So like when the instructor would say to exhale and inhale at certain times, I wouldn't do any of that. I'd kind of like be struggling and thinking about my body too much. And now when I go to yoga, I really breathe deeply and exhale until there's no air left in my lungs. And then it's amazing how relaxed that makes me feel at the end of it. I noticed as well, like the university recently offered free yoga sessions to people, the students at this uni, which I think is really great. So it's good that universities are like encouraging this type of exercise more. Next slide is talking openly to others. So you shouldn't hide your problems. I think you should try and say how you're feeling, because these days, like a lot of your interactions with people, it's like, oh hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? It's hard to distinguish when someone's actually fine. Like we say that word a lot, but you think, how are you feeling really, kind of thing to people. Not interrogating them, but just saying like. Just trying to get a feeling of how they are, and the same with yourself. Like, don't be afraid to say, oh well, I'm okay, but I'm quite stressed today because of this, that and the other. And I've had so many good interactions since like sharing my own story. I've had a lot of people say like, oh, I think your blog's really good, and then telling me about their own mental health issues. And I'm lucky I've got a good group of friends who are, we have a lot of fun together. We're also good at kind of talking more seriously as well. So yeah, talking to others, getting support from family and friends, it's really important. Volunteering, so I started volunteering earlier this year. It's how I got my current job. But while I was at Portsmouth doing my undergraduate, I actually volunteered for Groundwork South, who are like the same company kind of that I work for, but the South version rather than the Hertfordshire version. So that was really good. That was how I discovered them. And then in my interview for my current job, I said, oh, I've already volunteered for you at a different trust, like down south. So yeah, working for a charity is really good. It says on the picture, improve mental health, which I think is so true, because you're doing something which you can see is actively helping others, so you feel really good about it. So I can't speak highly enough of volunteering. We rely on volunteers while I work to make sure our projects are at a good standard. So I'd encourage any volunteering. My last slide is actually travelling. So this is a picture, I'm on the right. I was lucky enough to go to Sri Lanka last month. So this is us doing a silly surfing pose. There's a lot of cheesy phrases like, oh, travelling broadens the mind and you find yourself and all those sort of things. And we kind of said that a lot just to take the mick, but it's quite true. You do feel really good when you're travelling. You don't think about work and stress as much, and you actually get new ideas. So while I was in Sri Lanka, like, I kind of had lots of thoughts about what I was going to do when I got back, and I got home like really enthusiastic and like ready to get going again. So yeah, that's that slide. I think that's the last one. So I've put some further reading here, which I've also got as handouts. So the top one is my original blog that I did for Minds. Talks about my experience with psychosis. That was published in about August. And last month, a company called Trigger published Mental Health at University, which I wrote, and they published it the week before Freshers Week, so quite good timing. It's good for any freshers or people that are going for their second year, third year. And then I've started my own blog as well. I've called it Life of Jim because that's like my nickname, so I thought I might as well call it that. Some mental health posts on there. There's also other nonsense like film reviews, travelling, health and fitness, all sorts on there. So thank you for listening. There's my contact details if you have any questions, or I can stick around now.
You've got that, we can take that away.
Yeah, definitely.
You've got it on.
Any questions?